It's very clear that there's a lot of top talent in LATAM. There's a lot of US based companies that want to offer that want to leverage LATAM engineers or builders or designers. I think the other one is like understanding community building. I think sometimes when you're building, especially in the consumer side, what is it to build an actual community? And I think that becomes like a superpower for growth, where you can take the community that you've enabled and then you can pile that on into like your growth flywheel also.
If you were a founder, what are the other use cases or the other products that you should be starting to work today because they're gonna become something in the next 2 to 5 years? Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Frontera, the podcast where we analyze what's happening in crypto in Latin America. And today we have a really close friend of Bando and Espacio Crypto and everything that we're building. I think that a really close friend of LATAM, a lot of LATAM builders are using your infrastructure, Raj. Raj, the co-founder and CEO of Portal. How are you, man? Thank you for coming.
I'm good, man. This is a long time coming. I feel like we've obviously been friends for a long time, and so I'm excited to have you on Frontera for the first time.
Yeah, and a little backstory on how we met. When I used to work at Bitso, we were analyzing different vendors for a project that we were executing. Then I left Bitso, and Rush continued working in the product in Portal in Latin America. So thank you for coming. And man, first I'd love to start knowing a little bit of your story because you were part of Visa Crypto, and Visa has been really active in crypto lately, maybe. But if you've been in crypto for a long time, in the last 3 to 4 years, you've seen a lot of different initiatives in Visa and crypto. So could you tell us a little bit of your story? How did you join Visa? How did you started in Visa Crypto? What was your role there?
Yeah. So I was at Visa for about 7 years. First half of my time at Visa, I was building out infrastructure for banks around security. So it was related to fraud, exploits, breaches, and we built a platform around it to help banks, combat and mitigate that risk. It was actually in that time, in that intersection of the two worlds of security and payments, that I went down the crypto rabbit hole. I was one of the few crazy folks around like the 2015, 2016 time that was talking about crypto at Visa. Um, Fast forward a little bit, Visa was started to entertain the idea of like launching a Visa crypto team. Um, that was like, I think a big opportunity for me. I was one of the few folks that knew maybe a little bit more than everyone else at the time. Was leading crypto products globally. Ended up launching stablecoin settlement at Visa, which was really exciting. And I was just talking to some of the old Visa folks, but it's hard to believe that we launched stablecoin settlement almost 4 years ago. It feels like stablecoins is having a moment right now. But yeah, that was like my journey at Visa. Started from really a fan of open source blockchain technology, kind of seeing what like how Visa was built today. Joining and becoming a part of the first Visa crypto team, launching a product and market, and then eventually realized, like when I launched stablecoin settlement, that the infrastructure of the day wasn't really ready. It was really hard and it was really difficult to build that product. Left to build Portal. We're a stablecoin developer platform. We work with early stage companies all the way to enterprises to build to enable different products around stablecoins, from neobanks to freelancer platforms. And I joke like every boring payment use cases is now involving stablecoins in some capacity. And excited to serve many customers and work with folks like Bando and Kush at Odyssey as well.
Raj, it's awesome to have you on the pod. Really, the intention with this podcast network that we're launching is to be able to educate, particularly people who are not based in LATAM, and sort of share with them more about what does the builder ecosystem look like, who are the key infrastructure providers as well. We just covered Visa's recent launch with Bridge too, which is really exciting, basically enabling people to get access to cards as well in a very easy capacity. So give us just a bit more of a flavor into how you work with Latin American founders, what kind of services do you offer them, and kind of what the missing gap is there that Portal is offering these teams.
Yeah, so we provide all the building blocks, from embedded wallets to security tooling to SDKs across mobile, web. We make it really simple for anyone to go 0 to 1 to enable like a stablecoin powered solution. And so this could mean that I'm building a consumer neobank where I want to offer maybe P2P payments across my friends. It could mean that I'm building we have customers like Mesta that are building B2B platforms where you can enable money movement with stablecoins around the world. We have companies like Lula that are doing, working with import exporters to, use stablecoins for seamless payments, for for that specific vertical as well. So we get to our building blocks get to be the foundation for some of what these LATAM builders are leveraging, so that they can offer like a really cool value prop and business for their customers too.
Something, for example, in Bando we use Portal because part of the infrastructure that you've created is not only for any product that it's trying to build wallets, but also we use it in the backend because we need to manage some part of our infrastructure. So I think that you have a really complete stack with different solutions for builders. And something that you and I have discussed for a long time, and something that we've seen, or that I've personally seen in Portal's go-to-market, is that you are addressing a lot of founders, specifically in the LATAM region. So I'd love to understand your train of thought about you are building this wallet infrastructure, like wallet as a service infrastructure, and why are you focusing so heavily in LATAM in your go-to-market?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when we started the Portal journey about 3 years ago or so, I think a lot of the interest and appetite in crypto was predominantly about Web3. I think as we saw the market kind of unfold a little bit more, I think people started to ask ask like the hard, and myself included, were asking myself the hard questions of like, okay, what are the real use cases that we're seeing? Where do we see this market ultimately evolving into? And I think what I kept coming back to was stablecoins. I think it was like really clear to me, and this dates back to my time at Visa, that putting dollars in a more efficient global payment rail was going to be a really, really important innovation. And I spent a lot of time in South America. I've been to Colombia many times. I was actually just in Brazil last week. And so as I was thinking about the overall value prop of crypto and stablecoins broadly, it prompted me to travel and go to these markets like in Mexico, and see the Bando team in Mexico City, or be in Brazil, or be in Colombia. And that's where I realized that a lot of the value prop is actually the US dollar itself. And like the stable coins are the most efficient way to export dollars outside the US. And as you all know, that it's really, really difficult to get a US dollar denominated account in Mexico or in Colombia or in Brazil. Stable coins do that in spades today. Plus you can earn interest, plus you can build really different workflows that are not, you don't need a banking as a service provider or any of those sorts of pieces. You could actually enable a dollar enabled account or product pretty quickly. And so we kind of hit that and was like, you know what? I think this is going to be the big opportunity. And I think, LATAM is going to be ground zero. There's a really high concentration of high quality builders. The infrastructure and the market dynamics around stable coins is getting way more mature. We're seeing larger folks like, our friends at Bitso really kind of crushing it from a legal standpoint. It felt like it was just ripe for LATAM builders to go out and, build really unique products that the world has never seen before. And I think fast forward to today, we're obviously seeing a lot of that becoming true. And, we're seeing a lot of exciting projects starting to hit escape velocity as well.
I'm curious to ask you about I think we both, I was a Latin American based founder. We are as well. You work with a lot of Latin American based founders. What do you think the biggest challenges for these founders has been as you've been thinking? I mean, you've largely set up your company to solve a lot of problems for founders in the region. So what are you sort of common subsets and themes you've seen for a lot of these founders that Portal is solving, but just generally speaking, what are the problem sets you generally see these folks have to take on, and why is it much harder for a founder to be from the region operating here? And then following on from that, I'd also love to get a sense for what is uniquely positive about being a Latin American founder, and what are you hearing these founders, being able to bring to the market that they wouldn't be able to do in other regions?
Yeah, I think there's a couple areas on what I'm seeing from LATAM builders and what they could do differently. I think one is getting really specific and focused. I think there's a sense sometimes with stablecoins that use it as a catch-all, and you want to build many different types of products or verticals. I think the most successful LATAM builders that I've seen are the ones that really focus on a small set of users and have that progressively grow, and that they always ensure that the value proposition, the user experience, and the overall product opportunity and value is really, really high for a really small subset of of users first. And I think an example could be a very I think a pretty basic one or a common one is that the Freelancer platform. It's very clear that there's a lot of top talent in LATAM. There's a lot of US-based companies that want to want to leverage LATAM engineers or builders or designers. And I think there's a few companies that either try to catch all and be the best product for both freelancers, for local businesses, and the daily individual. And then there's some that just said, we're going to be really focused on freelancers and kind of build like the best in class brand for it. And I think you've seen a difference in like the growth and like escape velocity that those builders are able to achieve versus others. I think the other one is like understanding community building. I think sometimes when you're building, especially on the consumer side, what is it to build an actual community? And Espacio Crypto, Odyssey, like Bando, I think you guys are, I think, folks that people should look up to when it means like what it means to be community building. But I think that becomes like a superpower for growth, where you can take the community that you've enabled and then you can pile that on into like your growth flywheel also. And I think the last part is getting really clear on like, is this the market opportunity that I want to capture, right? I think sometimes you can also get pigeonhole yourself in like a smaller market opportunity too quickly also. Where in fact maybe it's and maybe the market doesn't grow over time too. And so I think it's constantly evaluating and being market driven, and understanding like what your users and your consumers or your customers are saying. I think these are just like key building blocks that LATAM builders need to see. But at the same time, like the opportunity is also there, and I think differentiating, like why are you different? I think also understanding that key question from the very beginning and forming that strong foundation is going to be incredibly important too.
Something that I've seen in different founders, and I'd love to hear your take here, Raj, is that there are the Latin American founder has a different user persona, and I see maybe three main builders in Latin America. The first ones are maybe people that are really enthusiastic and they don't have that much experience and they want to push things, but a lot of them fall through because maybe they don't have like the founder journey or they don't have the experience, and it's really hard for them to raise money, and at the end they die, like their companies die. The second one is maybe builders that come from different companies, maybe from Nu, Rappi, Bitso, and they are trying to push through these products. This type of founders also have troubles fundraising, but they are the ones that know the market the best. So they can connect really fast. They can acquire users, the initial users faster. And then there's this third type of founder that is like an international builder that maybe was working at a company like Revolut or Apple or something like a global product company, and now they're coming to Latin America and starting their companies. Maybe they've had an exit before. And I have like literal names on each one of these categories. So I'd love to hear, what do you think, if these are the three categories? Is there another category for founders? And also in each one of these, what's the main, you've mentioned the challenges, but what are the nuances of each one of these founder personas, if we can call them that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think overall, like I think irrespective of like the category of founder, I think building in LATAM, what I think is abundantly important is understanding the culture, right? Understanding the consumer and the users really, really well. And that might mean that you understand the differences in how the slang of Spanish, right, between Colombia versus Mexico. Like there's a lot of differences in like culturally that how people interact with money or how they even say a couple things also. And so I think that nuance and like that closeness with your community or user base is incredibly important. Like I think there are cases where you're an international builder, you kind of you do the TAM analysis on LATAM, you live in LATAM after a while, and then you kind of use like traditional frameworks of building a company, and then you scale up. I think those folks have to really understand and deeply embed themselves into the culture of the communities that they built as well. It can't just be like another Silicon Valley type of company and like hope it's it scales pretty quickly. I think embedding like the frameworks with like the cultural nuance is going to be incredibly important, and I think it's going to exist across all different categories. And my argument is that the local builder that's someone that like lives and was born and raised and understands like the pain point intimately will be a lot more successful to capture that. There's got to be some version of that within your company, whether you hire for that and someone can represent your users within the company, or as a founder you kind of embody that DNA of like what that culture means for you as well. So I think I don't think I think all categories can be successful. I think they'll all have different starting points, but I think it's a combination of, do you understand what it means to build a company? But do you, especially if you're going to be building in LATAM, do you understand the culture really well also, and how your product fits within the cultural habits of that user?
That is so interesting because Kush and I have discussed this a lot, and I'd love also to hear what do you think, Kush. But LATAM founders, I see specifically two main challenges. The first one is that sometimes we don't think big enough, and that's a reality. So I chat with a lot of fellow founders, and they say, okay, I'm building this product. The market size is for 100,000 people, and it's like, man, you're not gonna make it. We need to think bigger. It's something like really cultural in us. And another challenge is in around fundraising, because I think that international builders have a lot more contacts and it's easier for them. They have access to more capital. That's it. The amount of capital deployed in Latin America, it doesn't compare with something like Asia and the US. So for Latin founders, how do you suggest to approach fundraising conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a really important point. I think it's oftentimes, and this is like going to sound counterintuitive, but it's oftentimes easier to raise large amounts of capital than like less capital sometimes. I think sometimes if you are able to showcase a really strong vision and an ambitious, I think, mission to go after, it obviously gets a lot more exciting if you can, be an international thinker and kind of talk about, hey, we're starting with LATAM, but this is how the community, grows, overseas or other markets. That gets really exciting as well. And you're starting to see this like take off with like there's like some international builders that their starting point might be Asia, right? But they're pitching the vision of like we are going to be like the next Revolut, or we're going to be the next enter global, you enter the name of a global company, and then LATAM happens to be one of their businesses or one of their markets. They might have a better chance. I think sometimes like what LATAM founders can do a better job of is understanding what is the advantage for building in LATAM first. And I think that's sometimes that like a question that a LATAM builder doesn't really answer. And I think when you go to Brazil, or you can there's a lot of different nuances to like the Brazilian financial ecosystem that you can articulate to an investor to be like, hey, this is why you know phase one for our business is starting in Brazil, but this is how we can expand it to more markets afterwards. Or the same could be said for Mexico also, of like here's my wedge to enter the market. So I think those are like the two things. It's like one, sometimes it's easier to raise more capital than less capital. And then two, if you are going to start in LATAM, right, in a specific market or country, really try to showcase like a counterintuitive insight that you only know about that market, of which is the reason why that you should be starting to build, your product or your startup in that country also.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think honestly, it's primarily cultural reasons why a lot of these founders are, and we work with a ton of them, basically are hamstrung when they think about their vision, what fundraising looks like, what the problems that they're tackling looks like as well. We generally, I would say, because of a lot of cultural and religious connotations, it's like don't deviate from the mean, try to stick to what you know. But really, I think the breakout successes are the ones that really are able to sort of push past that. And it's a region that's honestly, frankly, ripe for opportunity. One thing we found really interesting, and I'd love your takes on this, right? With this recent like Visa and Bridge announcement, I don't know if you noticed this, but the countries where they're first rolling this out are going to be Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Chile, right? And this is a massive for us. Like the way we're thinking about this rollout, and I'm sure it sort of touches on some of Portal's business lines as well, right? We actually think this unlocks a lot of different opportunities. The same day this was announced was the same day that Eduardo published this thread on why the Bitso card was shut down. And in part, it was because of the operational overhead that it took to, I don't know if you saw this thread, but it was basically a thread that ran,
Yeah.
yeah, right, exactly. And it was like, hey, here's why we had to shut down this card, because it was operationally just like really expensive. And in theory, this sort of Visa and Bridge partnership resolve that, right? So how do you think about these other global players? How do they think about the region? Are they just and I think Latin America is the most important region for crypto, right? Like that's our thesis. We're incredibly biased, and I'm very okay with that bias. But we do think that's the case, and I think Visa and Bridge are rolling this product out first. MetaMask card, one of the first regions they're focusing on is Latin America as well. So what's happening on the global stage that people are turning to the region and saying this is a region that we want to roll these products out first in. We've got DevConnect happening in November as well, which is going to be a big event. So what's going on the global stage that Latin America now seems to be a really exciting region for folks.
Yeah, and then, I think it's hard to extrapolate this across like other markets, but I remember talking to like an engineer in Argentina, and obviously like everyone knows like the long history that Argentina has had with like inflation and like the economic volatility also. But he mentioned like the seeds of like the economic volatility also meant that some of the Argentinians are actually early adopters for new financial products also, and because of that, crypto's kind of become like an easier almost entry for some of these folks, because they're like, yeah, we're constantly evaluating new products and new services at at the product level, so that we could be more self-sufficient or preserve our wealth or whatever that might be as well. And so I've generally noticed like an interest across Latin American builders and like users to be like open to being early adopters of new products also. And that means like, checking out like what's a dollar, a a stable coin denominated, product or service, across the local market. And I think a lot of folks at the global level are also recognizing that as well, like similar to like what Bridget did with Visa as well, where, yeah, I mean, there's a long drawn out process to issue cards in the US, but you're now like competing against JP Morgan Chase or Bank of America. But when you go down to LATAM, there's actually a really unique opportunity. It's like, one, if there's adoption of stablecoins and fiat denominated crypto assets, plus plus there's interest to spend. I mean, you're not I think a lot of the folks in LATAM, like I've noticed this, and I know you can speak to this at Endo as well, that people don't want to just hold their funds. They need to pay their bills. They need to buy groceries. They may want to buy a cup of coffee. They want to spend as well, and giving a nice link between I can hold a dollar denominated account and I can get all the benefits of that. I can potentially earn interest. I can save my funds in a stronger currency. Plus, I can spend that is a really strong value proposition. And then I think if you're a LATAM builder, what's really cool is that interchange and like the economics around what a card product could look like also gives you shared upside, and there's like a revenue model that you can build into it too. So I think my time at Visa, like I spent a lot of time working with different card issuing products out there. It's really exciting to see like this new class of issuers that are coming out with stablecoin first products, and we're also seeing a lot of the existing card issuers like a Pomelo or like a Doc that are in the market also now starting to see and wake up to the fact that a stablecoin denominated account is actually quite exciting in LATAM as well.
Something that I've been thinking a lot of is that I think that, like, I don't know, the US has waken up to stablecoins. Obviously for the political environment and all of that, and also for me it's obvious it's the best way to export their debt. The thing that I mean, it's kind of polemic to say, but how could you have almost zero interest rates and more buyers of treasury bonds? Well, through stablecoins. Basically, people in Latin America, if they are not promised a yield on the USD, they don't care that much. We don't care that much because we see the dollar as like a super strong currency. Therefore, you could have almost zero interest rates, and you're going to have demand in this part of the world. The thing is that there's no product, or before like the past years, there was no product or no technology to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's a really interesting, like, I think, observation that you made where, and I've noticed this as well, like a lot of the LATAM products don't offer like interest or yield, but if you wanted to offer a similar product in the US, it's like almost like a joke to not be, you almost have to provide yield for it to be even like an interesting option for, for a customer to switch from like their existing bank account. But I think it also speaks to your point about like the global applicability for stablecoins, like in LATAM, but in other markets also, where the US dollar in itself is actually a pretty strong value prop. And then as you start to get more sophisticated with the product and offering interest yield as well, it becomes like a really cool customer acquisition wedge that you can either invest in like growth opportunities as a LATAM builder, or you can just like offer like a best-in-class product for your user as well.
Yeah, and Raj, also you are a really savvy product person in the payments world, working at Visa, working at Portal, doing all the infrastructure that you're doing. I have this mental framework where we segment users in people that see crypto as an investment, that's like developed markets, and people that see crypto as money. When you see something as money, you're willing to spend. When you see something as an investment, you basically don't want to get rid of that asset. So part of this thesis is that the initial use case for stablecoins and all of this infrastructure being built on stablecoin rails, it has a lot to do with payments and money transfers, like remittances, trade finance, and all of that. I would love to understand and to hear your take on what's coming afterwards, because I think that stablecoins, they are like a reality right now. We have a huge wave of funding on these startups. So basically, a lot of people could be already late to stablecoins. A lot of the infrastructure that has been built for the past 3 years, it's already there. So we don't need more portals. Portal is already dominate, or maybe not dominating, but addressing this market really heavily. If you were a founder, what are the other use cases or the other products that you should be starting to work today, because they're going to become something in the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's obviously a tough question, but I'll do my best to I think answer it. I think There's a couple different areas here. I think one, again, getting really, really clear about who your user base is, right? Who your audience is. Is it banks? Is it individuals? Is it businesses, right? I think a lot of what we've seen with stablecoins so far has been a lot of consumer-centric experiences. I think everyone has kind of explored like the neobanks, the freelancers. I think the next wave that I kind of see happening right now is, how do you enable banks to then interact with stablecoins? Like, how do you connect domestic RTP systems with stablecoins? What type of infrastructure does a bank need to now enable that? Another one is like, for small businesses, right? If I'm like a small business in the US, I mean, in Mexico or in Brazil, and now I want to, I want to start my business. I want to have like a corporate card that I also want to keep. I have a bunch of vendors and suppliers that have to pay overseas also. So I still think, penetration across the SMBs across LATAM is still early days. It feels a lot of like the first adoption has been consumers. I think there's an opportunity to like, as those consumers become early adopters of stablecoins and this technology, that there's a potential expansion into like the SMB department. And I think as the banks start to observe this transition where consumers start to transition to stablecoins, now businesses start to transition to stablecoins, I think it opens up a really interesting opportunity as like, how does like the infrastructure set or the application layer start to then, be something that even banks decide to consume as well, and potentially the federal government. I think the other part that I think is hard to not, I think dismiss is like the LLM and AI wave that's currently happening right now. And, you're starting to see a lot of interesting experiments like, what Felix Pago is doing with, WhatsApp, based experiences, or Maggie in Brazil, right? I think a combination of like, how do you leverage LLMs, which could potentially be a new paradigm for how you interact with products, but also seeing like the transition from consumers to businesses to potentially banks and beyond as well. So those are like some of the elements that if I was a LATAM builder, I would definitely be exploring.
So last question here for you, Raj. What is your read on the Latin American institutional landscape with regards to crypto? What are you seeing these folks care about? How are they thinking about crypto in the region? I'm sure by the time either the startups that you service or maybe the institutions themselves that you work with, they've already developed quite a strong thesis. But what's the general read? Ab and I were speaking, I know you were just in Brazil recently, how Brazil is this fascinating market. It was the first market to have an XRP ETF, Solana ETF. They recently did a very similar sort of micro strategy launch with one of their funds that 2x in a matter of a week or so, right? So we're seeing, institutions begin to get more familiarized with crypto, Brazil in particular. But what are you seeing just across the region? How are they thinking about allocating to this asset class?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's, I think if you asked me maybe a year or two ago, it'd been more of a question about, why? Like, why do I do these things in crypto? Like, I think that's what a lot of these institutions would be asking themselves. Increasingly, like, as I've spent more time in South America and LATAM broadly, like, it's been more of a question about when now, and then like what. And so we've seen a lot of progress saying, no, there's enough adoption here that we need to go build and like have teams and execute on it. So I think the opportunity is like it's just beginning, and there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm around it. I'm frankly speaking very energized by the institutional interest in that as well. Like, I'm even seeing a lot of banks start to, I think move really fast, assemble teams, and see what they can do also. So I think it's just a matter of time. I think it's again like less of a why question, now more of a when and what. And I think most of these teams are like actively in like brainstorming sessions and ideations and product strategy sessions. They're evaluating the startup ecosystem a lot more seriously as well. I think some of the institutions historically have been like, no, we'll let the startups kind of figure it out. I think now it's like startups have figured a lot of it out, and like we need to play some catch up as well. So for the first time, I've seen some of the institutions have some angst as well to catch up and either build their own crypto exchange or build their own. They have to do more than just what they typically do. They have to. They might get left behind pretty quickly also.
What's missing for these institutions? Like, if we had these different conditions, this would accelerate their interest and engagement in the ecosystem.
I think regulatory is always like the tough one for institutions. I think the more regulatory clarity you have, and I think it's no surprise in the Brazilian market, the Brazilian central bank has been super innovative and really far and away like one of the leading central bankers in the world. I think they kind of set the tone from the very beginning, and they meaningfully engage with the ecosystem, and that's what's prompted more of these products to come into the market as well. So it definitely starts with the regulatory requirements, and I think in the U.S. we're seeing something very similar with the Stable Genius Act as well. As those things start to get passed, it wouldn't be no surprise that more U.S. institutions are saying, okay, well, we got the green light, we can go build some of these products out there as well. I think that's like the real thing. And I think maybe a year or two ago I said like more infrastructure maturity. I think we're there now. I think it's more of like an education question and like how do you bridge the infrastructure that's available versus like the product strategy that some of these institutions when they go implement. And I think that's honestly the gap at this point. So it's more of a race to execute.
Super interesting, because building with these huge companies, one of the main constraints is how do you have institutional grade without a lot of integration complexity, and I think that we've discussed about that, Rush.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, it's funny because we started, one of some of our early customers was Bitso as an example. Bitso is 8 million users, large company. And so, I think for us, we were like, we can't take shortcuts because we want to go, be fast and nimble and break things. It's when you're building something as, robust and as important as like the underlying infrastructure for financial assets, you can't really take shortcuts. There's no room for that. We had to go get our SOC 2 Type 2 licenses up front. We had to do a bunch of security audits also. And I think that's what, those credibilities kind of compound each other. If mature, infrastructure builders out there that are, doing all the right things, it gives the institutions a lot more confidence to then build with the space as well. If they came to me and saw that I was taking a lot of shortcuts, they might be like, you know what, we need to give it another couple more years. Even though the regulatory environment is, maybe more mature now, the infrastructure doesn't seem mature about it. So I do think like the credibility of how you build infrastructure actually compounds on its own, and the regulatory, pieces are also just as important too.
Yeah. I think that's one of the main reasons why I think that vibe coding is going to impact crypto at the end, because you cannot vibe code a smart contract and just get hundreds of users or millions of users drained. So
you have to vibe code security.
yeah,
Like vibe
exactly.
coding security or vibe coding SOC 2 Type 2 compliance is unfortunately not quite a thing. But obviously there's but who knows with AI, like it might a
Not
lot of
yet.
these things could be
I
automated.
actually think it will be. We 100% like, especially in Latin America, the regulatory arbitrage for frontier technologies like AI. I'm so excited when I don't like. I mean, I'm sure you've dealt with your fair share of like really annoying kind of regulation here in the region, right? But it's so archaic. I'm like, I can't wait till I can just tell my agent like, hey, file all my taxes and do all this, and then it's not like a month-long process.
Yeah.
Definitely. Raj, man, thank you for coming to the Frontera podcast. Just before finishing, a couple of questions. And you need to be careful with this one. What's your favorite LATAM dish?
Ooh. Well, so I think it varies by market a little bit. I like caipirinhas in Brazil. Those are amazing. The bandeja paisa in Colombia. You got to stick with the tacos in Mexico. Like those are just, so I think it varies by different markets. The lomo saltado in Peru. So I think, as you know, when you go to LATAM enough, there's a lot of different nuances there. So it's hard to pick what's my favorite across the board, but every country has
very diplomatic answer.
Yeah, definitely.
If you had chosen any one food, everyone else would have been offended.
Yeah, exactly.
A drink from Brazil. I've been there enough, and I go there enough where I enjoy lots of different parts of it.
You're such a gentleman, Raj. And just to close, something that we ask all of our Frontera guests is: could you tell us an insight about LATAM that when you heard it, it was just super surprising for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's three that come to mind immediately. I mean, one, I think is how the IOF taxes are done in Brazil. There's some basis points difference between going from BRL fiat to USD fiat versus going to USDC, and that tax arbitrage is actually like a big driver of growth, especially across like the Brazilian communities. I just came back from Brazil, so a lot of Brazil is like top of mind, but I think even like the open finance, you can KYC once with a single bank in Brazil, and then you can essentially have that KYC tokenized across other Brazilian financial institutions also. That's a pretty compelling opportunity where in the US and other markets, you're almost forced to do like KYC reliance agreements. So it's quite difficult to do. I think the other one that's kind of interesting is that, and people don't really talk about this enough, but the MXN peso is actually not as volatile as people think. It doesn't move as much as an ARS or other currencies out there. it's always kind of leaning anywhere between like 18 to 22 in terms of, US dollars. And so it's actually the least volatile, I think LATAM currency, when sometimes people might expect that every LATAM currency is volatile. That's actually not the case as well.
Oh,
My home country's Guatemalan Quetzal is also very stable, but it's not a huge market. Little known fact, little trivia fact.
Or Panama is fully dollarized as an example, right? Where
Exactly.
it's, these are, I think, some of the things that people kind of bucket things sometimes as like, oh, ARS is inflation, inflationary, so like everything else is. It's actually not the case.
Yeah. Actually, I think that in 2023, Mexican peso was the best performing currency in the world, better than the US, like the USD. So we had the super peso that finished, but yeah, I don't know. It's really, we always say at the Frontera podcast how each market varies a lot. So
Exactly.
Raj, thank you for coming, man. Where can people find you? Where can people learn more about Portal?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Raj Parekh _ and then also portalhq.io if you want to get in touch with the Portal team as well. Thank you guys for having me. It's always fun talking about LATAM. This is near and dear to my heart, so this is a lot of fun.
Amazing, man. Thank you. You can follow Kush at 0xkush. You can follow me at AbrahamCR. Remember to subscribe to our newsletter. We are producing the best research content in Latin America about crypto. So thank you, guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Ciao, ciao.